The day had arrived, and Ada stood at the altar, her heart racing as she exchanged vows with Chidi. Her mother, Mrs. Okoye, was beside her, beaming with pride. It was a moment of celebration, the culmination of years of dreams and planning. Yet, beneath the joy, Ada felt a sense of unease she couldn't shake. Something had happened just a few weeks before the wedding that still lingered in her mind. It had been a rainy evening, and Ada and Chidi were leaving church together. The streets were slick with rain, and the air was cool as they hurried toward the car. As they were about to enter, a strange woman, dirty and disheveled, appeared out of nowhere. She reached out and grabbed Ada's hand tightly. Her laugh echoed in the air, unsettling Ada. "Keep your wedding simple," the woman said cryptically, her eyes wild with intensity. The words seemed out of place, out of time. Ada froze, not knowing how to respond. Around them, people nearby had started to murmur. Some said she should ignore the woman. "It's the devil trying to ruin your marriage," they whispered. Others were more insistent. "Maybe it's a prophecy. Perhaps she's telling you something important. You should listen." But Ada didn't know what to believe. She felt a strange chill, and for a moment the words seemed to echo in her head, even after the woman had disappeared into the rain. The unease followed her home, and the next day she confided in her mother. "Mother," Ada began hesitantly, "something happened yesterday. A woman outside the church. She told me to keep my wedding simple." Mrs. Okoye's reaction was immediate and sharp. "What are you talking about, Ada?" she said, her voice rising with emotion. "Why would you listen to a mad woman? What does she know? I've spent months planning this wedding, and you are going to have a big celebration. Do you hear me? A big one." Ada tried to explain, but her mother wouldn't let her finish. "You know what people have been saying about me, about my daughters," Mrs. Okoye continued, her voice trembling with a mix of pride and defiance. "I am the last one. Your sisters never got married. They had children, yes, but they never got the chance to stand here in a wedding gown. You're the one I've been waiting for, the one who will prove them wrong, prove that my daughters can get married, and no one will dare mock me again." Tears welled up in Mrs. Okoye's eyes. "Do you want to disgrace me, Ada, after all I've prepared for this day? Do you want to shame me in front of all my friends?" She wiped her eyes dramatically, her sobs echoing in the room. "After everything I've sacrificed, you're going to ruin it with a simple wedding? No, I won't allow it." Ada glanced over at Chidi, who had been standing quietly, observing the exchange. He knew better than to interfere in this conversation. He could see the storm building in Mrs. Okoye, and he knew that when she made up her mind, there was no changing it. His silence spoke volumes. Mrs. Okoye had always been this way, strong-willed and unyielding, especially when it came to her family's reputation. Mrs. Okoye's face hardened, and she gave them both a warning look. Mrs. Okoye's face hardened, and she gave them both a warning look. "If this wedding is not done the way I want it, if it's not grand and extravagant, I won't be there, and I won't give my blessing." The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She was the only parent Ada had left, the only one who had always been there for her. Despite the tension, Ada knew that they had no choice. It was either meet her mother's demands or risk losing her completely. So, they decided to go along with it. The wedding would be grand, just as Mrs. Okoye had planned. The celebration was nothing short of extravagant. The hall was decorated with shimmering gold and white, glistening under the lights. The sound of laughter and music filled the air as guests milled around, sipping drinks and admiring the opulence around them. The food was plentiful. There were trays of jollof rice, fried rice, goat meat, chicken, and an array of small chops. There were desserts in abundance, cakes, pastries, and fruits, all carefully arranged to impress. Mrs. Okoye made sure that everyone had their fill, personally directing the catering staff to ensure no one was left hungry. The MC, a well-dressed man with a booming voice made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly ask that no money is sprayed on the couple. Instead, please place all contributions in the special basket beside them. Let's show our love and support in this way." The guests followed the instructions, and soon the basket was overflowing with notes, though it wasn't the traditional way people expressed their generosity. Meanwhile, Ada's grandmother, Grandma Amarachi, sat quietly in the corner, her sharp eyes observing every movement. She had been invited, of course, but she was much older now, preferring to sit back and watch rather than take part in the frenzy of the celebration. Ada noticed her grandmother's gaze from across the room. Her presence was calming, almost like an anchor in the midst of the whirlwind of activity around them. When it was time for the families to dance with the couple, the energy in the room reached a fever pitch. Guests moved onto the dance floor, and music filled the air. Ada's family, with all their charm and energy, joined in the fun. But then, it was Grandma Amarachi's turn. Slowly, she rose from her seat, her movements deliberate and graceful for her age. She carried a wrapped gift in one hand, her other hand clutching a bundle of 5 naira notes. People around her whispered and giggled. "Typical grandmother," one person joked. "She's always so stingy with money." The chuckles were loud, but Grandma didn't seem to mind. She walked up to Ada and Chidi, presenting her gift and placing the bundle of notes into the basket with an almost ceremonious air. Later, after the wedding, Ada and Chidi boarded their luxurious flight to Lagos for their honeymoon. Ada and Chidi's honeymoon in Lagos was everything they had hoped for and more. The luxurious hotel was like a dream, and the peace of being away from the bustle of their wedding day allowed them to relax and truly enjoy their time together. Ada felt a sense of completeness. She was a virgin, and it was something her family had cherished and celebrated. Chidi, knowing how important it was, had even paid extra in her bride price list, a gesture that meant a lot to her and her family. The next morning, they began unboxing their wedding gifts, excited to see the new cooking utensils, household items, and everything that came with starting a life together. Most of the gifts were thoughtful and practical, but one in particular caught their eyes. It was a complete set of a green suit, at least that's what it was meant to be. The suit looked like it had been through years of wear and tear. It was torn in several places and looked like nothing more than a rag. Both Ada and Chidi stared at it in disbelief. They couldn't understand why anyone would gift them something so inappropriately damaged. It felt disrespectful, and both were shocked that such a gift had made it into their collection. They exchanged a confused glance before deciding to just burn it. There was no point in holding on to something that didn't even resemble a gift. They quickly moved on, focusing on the excitement of the new life they were beginning. As the years passed, everything seemed perfect. Ada gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, strong, healthy, and full of life. He was the pride of their little family, and their home felt even more complete with the joy he brought. They were the picture of happiness, until life started to test them. It began subtly at first. Chidi lost his job. Ada had always known him to be a hard worker, but this loss hit him harder than she anticipated. Chidi had always been the provider, but suddenly, without the steady income, he began to change. Slowly, he started drinking, something that had never been a part of him. Ada noticed at first it was just a small drink here and there, but soon it became more frequent. She was shocked. One evening, after a few drinks, Ada asked him, "Chidi, what's going on? Why are you drinking so much lately?" He looked at her, his eyes clouded with frustration and sadness. "I'm frustrated, Ada," he admitted, his voice rough. "I can't provide for my siblings anymore. They keep calling me, asking for money, and I have nothing left to give. I've failed them, and I've failed you." Ada's heart sank. She had always known how much he cared for his family, how he would do anything for them. But seeing him so defeated and burdened with the weight of responsibility was difficult. She tried to console him, offering advice and encouragement. "Chidi, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together. You've always been strong, and we can find a way forward. You don't have to carry the weight of everything on your own." But despite her words, things weren't improving. Chidi's frustration grew, and it began to weaken Ada. She could see how the pressure of his failures was eating at him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something more was needed to fix their situation. Ada knew they couldn't just rely on Chidi anymore. She had to step in and find a way to support the family. Reluctantly, she decided to look for a job. With a baby and the pressure mounting, Ada pushed aside her doubts and fears and took a position to help make ends meet. It was hard at first, juggling work, motherhood, and supporting Chidi. But Ada was determined. She knew she couldn't let their family fall apart. Despite the struggles they faced, Ada continued to believe that together they could overcome anything. But as the days went on, the challenges became harder, and the cracks in their once happy home started to widen. As time passed, Ada and Chidi's situation became more dire. They could no longer afford the rent for their apartment, and the weight of their struggles started to consume them. The once thriving family now faced hardship after hardship. Despite her best efforts, Ada's new job couldn't provide enough to cover the growing expenses for 3 people. The financial strain weighed heavily on both of them, and it wasn't long before they realized they couldn't keep up with their rent or the cost of living. It was around this time that Ada found out she was pregnant again. At first, she was filled with a mix of joy and anxiety. The thought of another child was overwhelming, especially with everything they were already dealing with. When she shared the news with Chidi, however, his reaction was far from what she had hoped for. "I can't handle this, Ada," Chidi said, his voice desperate. "I'm not ready to father another child in this situation. We're barely making it as it is. You have to remove it." Ada's heart broke. She had always wanted a big family, and though their circumstances were tough, she believed that with God's help, they could make it through. "No, Chidi, we can't. We have to trust God. With God, everything is possible. Don't give up on our family." She tried to hold on to the faith that had once been a cornerstone of their marriage, but Chidi didn't see it that way. The stress, the loss of his job, and the pressure of feeling like he was failing, everyone seemed to strip away the belief he once held so strongly. His frustration grew into something darker, and he began pushing Ada to abort the child multiple times. Each time she refused, his anger seemed to spiral further. It was clear that his faith was no longer there. The man who had once trusted in God now felt abandoned by him, and it was taking a toll on their relationship. In the midst of all this, Chidi's behavior grew more erratic. Every little mistake seemed to trigger his anger. It wasn't long before he started hitting her. At first, it was just small things, pushing her in frustration, grabbing her too hard. But soon, the violence escalated. Ada would cry, her heart breaking not just from the physical pain, but from the realization that the man she loved and married was no longer the same. She tried to understand. In her heart, she knew this wasn't Chidi. Something had changed in him, something she couldn't quite explain. She believed that a spiritual force was behind his anger and violence, pulling him away from everything he once held dear. Despite everything, Ada refused to give up on him. She clung to her faith, praying constantly for God to intervene, to bring her husband back to her, to fix their broken marriage. But then, a tragedy struck. Ada lost the baby. It was a blow that shattered her, but at the same time, it felt like one less thing to worry about. She cried for the child she had lost, but she also knew that their finances couldn't bear another mouth to feed. With no way to pay their rent and no savings to fall back on, Ada and Chidi made the painful decision to move into a smaller apartment. The space was cramped, and they could hardly afford the essentials, but it was all they could do to keep a roof over their heads. The change in living situation only added to their isolation. They became more reclusive, avoiding visitors as much as possible, not wanting anyone to see how far they had fallen. When Ada's mother called to ask about her grandson, Ada would lie, saying, "He's in a boarding school." It wasn't entirely a lie, though. It was the only way to avoid the awkward truth. The reality was too painful to explain. Despite the circumstances, Ada kept praying for a miracle. She prayed for Chidi's heart to soften, for God to intervene and restore their broken family. Chidi never thought his life would take this turn. Once a man of dignity and respect, he had now become what he despised, a thief. It started with small things, a little money here, a forgotten phone there. At first, it was out of desperation. Then, it became something else, something beyond his control. It was as if a force stronger than him was compelling him to steal. Every time he entered a crowded place, markets, bus stops, or even a church gathering, he heard a voice whispering, "Take it. Nobody will notice. You need it more than they do. Just one more time." His hands moved before he could stop himself. The thrill, the fear. It was all becoming a twisted cycle he couldn't break free from, until one fateful day. It was a busy afternoon in the market. Chidi spotted a well-dressed man buying food, his wallet peeking out of his back pocket. The voice came again. "Take it." Before he knew it, his fingers had already snatched the wallet, smooth, swift, just like before. But this time, he wasn't lucky. The man tapped his pocket, froze, then turned sharply. "My wallet! Somebody took my wallet!" A trader nearby shouted, "Nah, that man take am!" Heads turned, eyes locked onto Chidi. Panic shot through him, and he bolted, pushing past people. But before he could escape, strong hands grabbed him from behind. "Thief! Thief!" A voice rang through the air. A mob formed within seconds. Angry traders and passers-by circled him. The rage in their eyes was unforgiving. "You dey thief for this market? You no go leave here alive today," someone barked. Slaps landed from all directions. A punch to his gut sent him sprawling to the ground. Feet kicked him. Fists struck his face. Then, someone brought a tire. "Burn am!" a man yelled. Kerosene splashed over Chidi's body. His vision blurred with tears, his mouth filled with the metallic taste of blood. This was it. His end had come. Then, a desperate scream cut through the madness. "Stop! Please don't kill him!" The crowd hesitated. Ada burst through, her face drenched in sweat and tears. She flung herself over Chidi's battered body. "Please! He's my husband! He's not well! I beg you, don't do this!" she cried, clutching him tightly. The murmurs grew. Some people hesitated. "See how this woman dey disgrace herself for this useless man," one woman muttered. Another elder raised his hand. "Let her carry him, but if we catch am again, no mercy." The crowd slowly dispersed. Ada helped Chidi to his feet, supporting his weight as they staggered away. That night, their tiny one-room apartment was silent except for the sound of Ada's quiet sobs. She sat in the dark, watching Chidi's swollen face. The shame, the disgrace, the exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Chidi's heart sank. He struggled to sit up, his body aching from the beating. "Ada, please, don't leave me," he begged, his voice raw with pain. She looked away, fresh tears falling. "Chidi, do you know what you've done to me? Do you know how many times I've had to beg, had to cover for you, had to endure this shame?" I know, Chidi sobbed. "But Ada, I swear I don't want to steal. It's like something is forcing me." Ada's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Chidi hesitated, gripping his head. "Whenever I see money, anything valuable, I hear a voice. It tells me to take it. I try to fight it, Ada, I swear, but I can't. It's like something is controlling me." A cold chill ran down Ada's spine. This was beyond him. This was beyond them. This was not ordinary. Ada takes action. That night, while Chidi slept, Ada knelt down and prayed like never before. For 3 days she fasted. She wept before God. Lord, if this is a battle, then fight for us. If this is not ordinary, then expose whoever is behind it. On the 4th day, she made a decision. She found a church known for strong prayers and deliverance. The moment she stepped in, a heavy presence filled the air. People prayed fervently. Some cried. Some fell under the power of God. Ada joined them, pouring out her heart. Then, as the woman of God ministered, she suddenly paused. "I hear a name," the prophetess said, her voice strong. "Chidi." Ada's eyes flew open. She gasped. Her heart pounded. "It's him." Before she could stop herself, she ran to the altar. "He is my husband," she screamed. The woman of God turned sharply to her. "Ah, they don't want you people to smile. They don't want your marriage to have peace. The person doing this to you is very close. A household enemy." Ada collapsed on the floor, wailing. Her little son, confused but scared, clung to her tightly. The congregation erupted in powerful prayers. The air grew thick with the move of God. Ada's mind raced. Who was behind this? Why would someone close to them want to destroy their marriage? And most importantly, would Chidi finally be delivered? Who among them had sworn to ruin their marriage? Subscribe now to find out in Part 2. Question for married women. Have you ever felt like your marriage was under attack? How did you handle it? Let's talk in the comments.